Hello dear students, today our topic is history. This lesson is presented by Ergasheva D.K. Activities of our lessons are reading, working with the vocabulary, listening tasks, watching the DVD, speaking. So let's begin with warming up. Which important developments are shown in the photos? Maybe these comments will remind you of these events, for example such words as revolutions, inventions of the wheel. Pay attention to the words in bold because you will need them in the next activity. Revolutions, turning points, spread, development, advances, movements, foundation, invention, discovery, progress. So, next activity, put the words in bold above and the definitions below. For example, a moment of great change is revolution, what else? Movement, and etc. Yes? Next activity is reading. You will read the text about Galileo's explores the heavens and the steam engine. Please read, and then we shall do the following activities on them. So please answer the questions. What was the development? Where did it take place? When did it happen? Why was it important? Next activity is DVD preview. A little bit later we shall watch the DVD, but before it, please do the following activities. First, discuss what do you know about the painting below and the artist who created it. Do you know who was it? Next, read the sentences about Michelangelo. What do you think the words involved mean? Which two pairs of words have opposite meanings? For example, such words as unique, divine, eternal, extraordinary, mortal, awe-inspiring, eat, ordinary, aspirations. Could you find the words with opposite meaning? For example, ordinary and extraordinary, yes? Let's read these sentences about him, because maybe you will need them while you watch the video. Next, read about the BBC program, The Divine Michelangelo. What is the contrast between Michelangelo's life and his art? So, the BBC documentary examines the life and work of Michelangelo Buonarroti, one of the greatest artists in history. It looks at his background as a child in Florence and how he went on to produce works such as the Statue of David, the awe-inspiring ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and the dome of St. Peter's Cathedral, described here as the jewel in the crown on the Roman skyline. The program also reveals Michelangelo's tempestuous life, his fights with rivals and with his own demons, showing that an imperfect life can produce perfect art. So right now, watching the DVD, you can find the video in the module, and after watching, please do the following activities. Which of these sentences do you think are true? Michelangelo was a sculptor, painter, and architect. He said he was divinely inspired by God. He lived and worked 300 years ago. His mother died when he was a child. He was from a rich family. His father always wanted him to be an artist. Watch the DVD and check. Next activity, read the notes. Which words do you think are missing? So right now you will have listening activity. Listen to 3 people speaking about different decades. Which decades did they grow up in? Generally, do they feel positive or negative about that decade? So let's begin.
Recording 4. 1. Yeah, I grew up in the 90s. For me, film and music are two important aspects of my life, and it was a fantastic decade for both of those. In terms of films, there were some excellent ones that came out. My favourites being Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction, and The Shawshank Redemption. In terms of the music, probably the most famous bands of the time was Oasis and Blur. One of the most memorable moments for me of the 90s was Euro 96, obviously the football tournaments. I was lucky enough to go to the opening ceremony myself. Obviously, as we was entering the end of the millennium, the celebrations towards the end of the 90s were huge, as were the actual celebrations on the nights. Tony Blair was elected, so it's the first sort of Labour government for a long time. And also Mother Teresa died. Mother Teresa is the famous charitable missionary.
2. The 70s. Well, they were wonderful, I think. If I'm asked, was it a good decade or a bad decade? Personally, I have to think it was a good decade to grow up in. I think it's very lucky. I think of it as a very lucky experience when generally the world that I lived in, which was London and England, which was the post-war period and therefore an era of a certain amount of restriction, was all ending and things were freeing up. And that happened just at the time that I was leaving home and finding my own independence. It all seemed as though it happened at the same time. Technology was changing and improving. Everything seemed to be developing and getting better in many ways. The fashion was getting rid of short hair and regimented kind of looks. Individuality was very much the order of the day. Great people were emerging in the arts. John Lennon, for example, was an icon for me, I think, as a creative artist with a message as well in his work. Great artists in film, Scorsese, Taxi Driver, Spielberg, Duel. These were emerging artists of tremendous skill and artistry, but they were just starting out then when I was.
3. I was a teenager in the 80s and I remember thinking that I didn't like a lot of the fashion and the music from back then, but now it's obvious in retrospect that I did quite like it. I love looking back on like a nostalgia trip at the way we used to dress and how much hair gel I used and how much hairspray the girls used. And now in the 2000s there's like a sort of a trip back into that time. Girls are wearing big earrings again and geometric patterns on their clothes. The music in the 80s became quite computerised sounding, quite electronic, and disco faded away. Although we did still have soul, there were people like Luther Vandross and Billy Ocean making soul music. New Romantic was another style that came out in the early 80s where the men started wearing lots of makeup and had big shoulders and small waists. And there was Madonna, was a big trendsetter for girls. And at one point she cut her hair really short in the mid-80s and almost like a boy's. And then all the girls started cutting their hair short too. I wasn't very fashionable myself. I used to spend most of my money on records, not clothes. There were some good films around in the 80s too, things like Back to the Future with Michael J. Fox, Desperately Seeking Susan with Madonna, E.T., Police Academy. I'm going to be 40 this year, and I reckon my birthday party is probably going to be a big nostalgia trip back to the 80s.
So you have listened to the recording, and right now please answer the questions. What two important aspects of his life does Speaker 1 mention? What celebrations do you think Speaker 1 is talking about? Where is Speaker 2 from? Which musician was an icon for Speaker 2? What two things did Speaker 3 think he didn't like during the 80s? He later changed his mind. What trend did Madonna start in the mid-80s? So next activity is for vocabulary, periods of time. Put the words and phrases in order from the shortest to the longest periods. Use a dictionary to help you. A decade, a millennium, an era, a century, a quarter century, a fortnight, an age, the 1970s, 80s, the 70s, 80s, a generation. And next activity, complete sentences 1-8 with your own words. One more activity for vocabulary, periods of time. Complete the sentences with the words for periods of time. That was the last task, and here you have your homework. This is for speaking. Choose a period when you were a child, a teenager, or in your own 20s. What did people listen to, watch, wear? How did it change as you got older? Make some notes about the following: music, sport, fashion, TV or films, technology, issues in the news. So our lesson is over. Thank you for your attention. See you on my next lesson.